other side of it.
And in this next session, we'll be talking about safeguarding enterprise innovation with strategies and practices for business assurance. So please welcome on stage Patrik Fiegl, Global Head of Strategic Product Partnerships for Tricentis. Come on down, Patrik.
Thank you, Timo.
Over to you.
All right, welcome to this afternoon session here on quality as you walk through your journeys towards transformation. We are all about business assurance. You want to arrive where you plan to go. And there is nothing worse than going on a trip and then ending somewhere else, right? You want to go to Prague, you end up in Rome. Well, both are nice destinations for sure, but maybe someone was waiting for you in the wrong city. So that is the context within which Tricentis is, and to kind of put a little bit of flavor into this topic, I have brought the slide here that shows us who are the people involved in digital transformation and what are the processes involved therein. You can roughly think of it as the planning stage, enterprise architecture stage on the left-hand side, where you have the objectives of running the company. If we look at the blue area, achieving business results, right? We're all ultimately serving those, and business results can be achieved by executing processes. So we have people concerned with defining processes, process owners, who then also think about improving those, especially after technology brings up new potential for improving the processes. And for this all to happen, we need people to live in that space, and those are the users, and ultimately that's how the business operates. There is an external dimension to it, but there is not much magic to that part of the equation. Yeah? The magic happens, or the magic is supposed to happen, as we open the lid into the yellow area. And here we have all these worker bees, and I guess we're all part of this family here, who are making this blue magic happen. Yeah? How does this work? Well, again, we break it down into a strategic planning, a strategic agenda setting, objective setting, but then we really go into transformation initiatives, the middle part. That is what really keeps us working and keeps us running. And at some point, obviously, we have something to deliver, the final system that supports the new business processes, and we go into operations. Now, if we look at this framework here of people and processes from a perspective of quality assurance, these are the concerns that are related to the business transformation topic from a quality assurance perspective. And I am showing this at the beginning of my presentation to drive home the point, and that's the first take home, that quality is not testing 5 minutes before 12. We're not hidden away in the lower right-hand box of test scoping and test execution, where of course we also are and where we're rooted and where we come from. But unless you start transformation with a mindset of quality, you will never reap the fruits. And we have the tool set, we have the methodology, we have the IP, we have the services, and I'll talk about those in my presentation, to basically spread out from that position shortly before they go live into the beginning of the transformation phase, but even further into the planning stage. And why is that important? Yeah? Because ultimately, again, back to the comment about arriving at the right destination, you want to look at quality from a perspective of meeting the objectives of the enterprise. And how does this get translated to the topic of risk? As a business owner, I look at what I'm doing with my business, my resources, my markets, but I'm also very interested in understanding what could go wrong, because life is not a constant. So we lived in the United States for 23 years, left 4 years ago to move back to my country of origin, be with my parents. And now 4 years later, coming back to the US, I see a very different country than the country that I left. Many things were maybe predictable, other things were not, right? Some good, maybe some not so good, right? So that is, a snapshot of biography, and we can apply this to this realm of unexpected things happening. So again, if we focus on the impact of quality onto the business, it is about ensuring that things go as closely possible to the goals, to the objectives that were initially set, that we meet them. And in order then to really break it down and go from this expectation in the blue realm down to the way how we execute digital transformation, it is necessary to embed quality assurance in the way how you operate. So again, it is not about testing and using tools only. It is really about a modus operandi. It is about the working model. The presentation that was given yesterday by Darwin Diano from McKinsey, I liked it very much because he made the point that any transformation ultimately needs to go down into the depth of the working model. And that is really what we stand for. Last year I said on stage here that when you think of us as a technology provider, yes, that is true. We provide tools, but ultimately we teach you how to do this transformation in an organized and harmonious way. Right? So we're more in the realm of, I would say, dance lessons and orchestration, musical orchestration of the players when you think about it, because we help to do the right things across this entire chain. Now, let's look at transformation from a perspective of what is changing. Again, we stay with the blue and yellow tone here to say what is the business objective or what is the subject of change really from a business perspective. Well, at the outer edge, I would argue, it is the experience. It is the experience that a customer has with your company, that an employee has with your company, or that a partner has. How does that come about? Through changed business processes, that power these experiences. So the touch points with the enterprise ultimately, of course, need to be supported by some way of operating. And processes don't necessarily have to be static. So it doesn't mean that I'm arguing that everything is a standard, but it is the way of working, of creating value, and that is what I mean here. Now, that is the outcome that is intended. How does this come about in the SAP world? It comes about ultimately by introducing new applications from SAP or, God forbid, non-SAP into the landscape with the capabilities to run processes differently, which in turn relies on integration between those components. So here we have a technical layer that speaks to the way how these things are combined and coupled together. That could also change per se. And finally, underneath is, of course, a technology platform, which can be a stack with many different components. Now, as we go back to what I said a minute ago, that quality assurance is ultimately about reducing the risk in the trip to the destination. A lot of risk here at every level, basically, right? And if we then go down a little bit into the scenarios of change that we can have in SAP running companies, we need to even expand that, right? And double click a little bit on what are the technical deltas that are occurring here, the from and to. Very often we end up focused on the middle section, the transform section. We speak about activate, we speak about rise, we speak about going from ECC to S4. The reality is that's only one version of change, and actually that's not the one that will be the enduring one. Where we're going towards, the business suite represented here with this new logo, is not a static environment, right? This is not like I'm done, I've survived, now I can retire. Quite the opposite. The intent is to produce a landscape of change. What Gartner calls the composable ERP model. This is now what SAP calls the SAP Business Suite. And we speak about it in terms very similar to what we said almost 20 years ago when I look at my good friend Joe Shar here in service-oriented architecture, where we were saying, okay, we need to go away from this monolithic way of running IT for very highly standardized processes to giving more agility to the enterprise. In 20 years, I think we have learned that it's not about individual services as much as it is about components that you can bring together and switch on, switch off, because the price of change is so high. So you want to have the unit of change being at least providing value that is significant, and that is how we have arrived at this present stage. Now, any of the steps leading to an addition of innovation to that target platform is also one that can be subject to risk. So in other words, second thing to take home, not only are we not buried away 5 minutes before 12, I would argue we are everywhere. Tricentis is everywhere because quality is needed for any of these changes. All right, big statement, right? How do we deliver this, right? We're not here just to talk about vision, but we're talking about execution. First, of course, we have tools with capabilities. As a good SAP partner, we also use acronyms that nobody can remember. So I've expanded them here on the lower part of the screen. And again, I won't read through the entire structure here, but basically, especially for those who are not, in depth familiar with testing, testing is not just about repeating, clicks on the keyboard. A few days back, I had to write a script for Excel, and then somehow it always stopped at a certain point. So my automation tool was to take a little bit of a heavy rubber and put it on the Enter key, right? So that was the automation that was executed. That's not what testing is all about. This is what goes down at the execution level. Testing is about knowing what to test and having the ability to test it everywhere. Yeah? That is really why we have so many tools. Yeah? It's not just the matter of being able to validate the flow of the process and say, check mark, check mark, check mark. I've been able to go through all the fields on the screen to come to the end of the process. It is also important to understand, is the result at the data level correct? Data, the fuel of AI, right? So did we actually obtain the right result? So we, of course, have tools to validate data integrity. Data integrity not only during migration, but data integrity in live systems as well, right? As you continuously, for instance, upload your product lists into Amazon for your customers to shop, right? You want to make sure that it didn't just execute correctly and the green light from a technical perspective is on, but that semantically the content is really correct, right? So how closely are you monitoring that, right? Especially as we go into AI, are we making sure that not only is the data input correctly into the systems, but the outcome of the chained connection of systems is also still good. So second element, flow validation, data integrity validation. Last element is the performance, right? Is the system always going to be delivered even under load? And that is what we do with our performance suite. Again, this is all just the aspect of being able to test, whatever you want to test to the left and to the right. But testing is like going to the dentist. Yeah? Nobody does it for fun. Yeah? You want to do it quickly and efficiently if necessary. So very important, how do you limit testing, making sure you only test what is needed. And also that is part of our tools. A lot of tools, right? It's like going into a kitchen. We had the conversation during the pause about apples and food and so forth. So staying with the theme of the kitchen, the tools are only as good as the cook who's able to use them to deliver a delicious meal, right? And this is what we do. We don't just give you tools and say, have fun with them, but we give you instructions very precisely on how to use them. And that's what we call Tricentis quality assurance practices. And we have done them specifically for SAP. Why? Because we're not alone in the tool chain that our customers have. We're part of the integrated SAP tool chain, and therefore we very specifically call out what needs to be done with our tools in conjunction with the others in order to help you. So that's the rest of the presentation. I'm going to walk you through some of those here and basically divide it into three pieces. Yeah? Number one, those practices that are powered exclusively by our tools. So what can we do with the Tricentis tool set specifically? Secondly, those that are delivered in conjunction with other tools from the SAP tool stack. And then lastly, what can we do to accelerate the usage of tools by introducing content that is coming from the customer or from SAP? By the way, the clock is not working, I'm realizing, so maybe someone can give me a 5-minute warning when we're getting close to that. Yeah? All right, number one, the practices that are realized through the Tricentis tool set alone, right? There are many, and I'm picking out the base one, which is continuous testing. Continuous testing is the ability to automate testing, again, related to what I said before earlier, across the different domains of functional testing and non-functional testing. And why is it important? Well, to reduce the burden of this going to the dentist activity. What is the objective here? High degree of automation. High degree of automation across all the different types of quality assurance. Those, of course, that can be particularly well automated to the utmost. Those that are harder to automate, separate them out and isolate them in such ways where you still see your portfolio of automated tests via versus your exploratory tests that are conducted manually, but you still manage total status and total results. So this is the objective. And what are the conditions? The conditions are that you're able to do so in your landscape across all your applications, across all the different types of user interfaces, programmatic interfaces, protocols that you will encounter. So this is where we also shine. We are covering that entire gamut of, let's say, interface compatibility. And with that, what automation brings to the table really is a significant shift in identifying early in the stage of your transformation where the problems are, right? Going with the defects, from finding them as we go and later in the game with a massive impact on project runtime or business damage, to moving them to the front, right? Having this nice shape of this curve, this yellow curve here, front-loading the project, with diagnostics. For those who were up at the Leap Grade presentation, we have a very good collaboration with them. They're a tool or a tool set really that helps to implement SAP based on best practices and set up a factory modus operandi. So that is exactly how that is achieved, by introducing test automation early into the game. Secondly, by going back to the comment about focusing with your quality assurance on those areas where you really need to ensure quality, and this is focus on the risk that you actually enter. What you see here is a screenshot, I think the only that I'm showing from the tool today here, where you see that individual parts of your functionality in the system. So here we have an order taking system for vehicle sales, have different degrees of risk exposure. They have order taking from maybe, say, some maintenance that happens with the order at a certain later stage, has a different impact on the business. So we have both the tools to propose the damage class, we call it, so how big the impact is, by diagnosing the impact of technical change with regards to the functioning of your end-to-end processes. But we can also provide the methodology so you can go in and define those criteria upfront in alignment with the business. What does this give you now? It gives you the ability to say, here are risk classes that we will pay attention to, and then limiting the tests to those, by thereby, with the minimum effort, achieving a maximum risk mitigation possible. All right. Now, testing is only possible if we have tests, and that is actually the part where the dentist becomes painful. Building tests is a huge effort, and is something that is not only a one-time deal, but is also an effort for maintenance. Maybe that is even the worst part. After putting together your test catalog, keeping that up to date, making sure you still know which ones are alive and not. What do we bring to the table here? And this goes a little bit back to the origins of Tricentis. We, first of all, we abstract from the system under test, SUT, the interface description through a so-called automation model. I'll talk about that in a second. And then leverage that for automation and feed the data then through this abstraction layer back into the system under test to validate the behavior. This can go via user interfaces and APIs. Now, the traditional way of doing this would have been the one shown on the right-hand side here, by scripting, by using a technical language to represent the system under test. What we have brought in, and already for 15 years, is the abstraction by means of automation models. So using a very intuitive way of relating to the interface that basically mimics the structure of the interface, regardless of the technology that is behind the user interface. With that abstraction now, we can associate values to the fields that have been extracted, and we can run the tests and see that the application works as intended. But not only can we do this here for user interfaces, we can use the exact same method for testing APIs, right? So the benefit that I'm talking about here is the intuitiveness, right, of modeling the tests. And this is the second dimension, we're not doing this here piece by piece, field by field. We're doing this in a modular way. You see these funny orange Lego blocks here that basically can be used to taking some areas of tests, either parts of the screen or sequences that are standardized, and defining them once and then reusing them. And in the connection, you can have test templates that sort of define pre-delivered aggregations that you might be reusing. So this modular way of building test cases is another of our capabilities that set us apart so that the maintenance effort is easier, which is particularly important if you run this in organizations with many players. All right, let's talk about integration. This is my favorite picture here, so we're coming to the core of the presentation. We see the integrated tool chain present here with the different components, Tricentis on the lower right-hand side. And we see what ultimately the purpose of the tool chain is, namely to bring about information flows that lead you through what we saw at the very beginning, the planning and execution of transformations. So we start, of course, with a definition of processes in Signavio that represent how the company is supposed to operate. We have the portfolio of initiatives managed in LeanIX. Then from there we derive initiatives and tasks in initiatives in Cloud ALM, and those are then the ones that are being tested. Synity helping us to move the data, WalkMe helping to enforce the processes. So in this integrated tool chain, I'm going to call out one scenario here where we, thanks to being a partner of that integrated tool chain, we are a solution extension. And as you know, the SAP has this category awarded to certain vendors who have a unique spot on the white space, such as we do. We are able to work in predefined scenarios where we can, now in integrated status management, combine the capability of Cloud ALM for managing the tasks of transformation, amongst which testing is one, and therefore it's also where we would expect to see the status of how are we doing on testing, with the execution, which is shown on the right-hand side. This green block around data sets, I don't know how it ended up there. It's not supposed to be there. It's not part of the scenario here. Now, how does this integrated integrated test management function? You see it described here. We have change going through the landscape. The scope of the change that is going through the landscape is managed in Cloud ALM, or of course still in Solution Manager. We support both the on-prem and the cloud version of the toolchain, if you would, right? And then we hand off from that task management functionality to the testing tools, Tosca, testing the flow or testing the data integrity, and Neoload testing performance. But we limit the execution by means of Live Compare, which is the filter that performs the risk-based optimization that I mentioned before. So diagnosing in the transports what is really impacting the behavior of my system and therefore also my processes, and what is not, and excluding the things that are not affected by the transport. Now, why is this integrated? Because we have the information of scope going to our tools and the report back of results to Cloud ALM. So there is a system of record for tasks at large in the landscape, and one category of them being quality assurance related tasks that are delegated onto us. All right, last point I want to bring up here is the acceleration that we can introduce into this integrated tool chain by boosting the execution of the tools in reduction of manual labor. And one of the practices to do so is process-based testing. What is process-based testing? It is leveraging process models from Signavio or from other process sources to, number one, create skeletons for your test cases. Why is that? Because processes defined in Signavio or BPM tool are ultimately of the structure as test cases themselves. They give events, they define actors, they define inputs and outputs. Typically, process modeling happens at a much more coarse granular level, right? You speak about, for instance, create sales order, and then you ship the order. So that is, by orders of magnitude more coarse granular. However, the fundamental structure is that of the test case, right? So keeping those things closely together makes sense. Secondly, it makes sense to report back the results to the process to say, even after consideration of all the user interfaces and applications involved in the execution, we can report back that the quality of the process per se is safeguarded, right? So that's what process-based testing means, going and leveraging the definition for the purpose of building the test and then reporting back to the process. Now, I already mentioned that there is a fundamental similarity between the process model and the test case. Here you see it kind of detailed out again, and this is why we ingest the data from the process model and with it perform a creation of entities on the Tosca side. So first we identify the pieces that are in the process model, the tasks and the elements of reuse, introduce them into the library, and then from there build the test cases based on this modular approach that I referred. Now this is a scenario that is brought about by using integration technology. I see Malte Klassen here in the top at the end of the room here. He is the CEO of Galileo Group, and they have a tool called Conigma, which is capable of doing these things. So an integration tool sort of dedicated for the SAP tool stack, and amongst the scenarios supported, we have the integration with Tosca. This is an option. There are other options to do so, but this is one that also is in the spirit of easy to implement, rapid to use. Okay, so with that, I can sort of summarize, right, that no matter where you are in your transformation journey, we aspire and deliver, as the quality shield for business transformations, really going from the early stages of planning, aka enterprise architecture, via the business process management to the application lifecycle management. And with that, I hope I delivered some insight into what we do, and I'm happy, if we still have time,
to plenty of time.
Then we will open up for questions.
Yeah, we have 13 minutes.
Okay, great.
You can give long-winded answers if you want.
Okay.
So we have different questions.
With the introduction of Joule and all of this new technology coming, what's Tricentis' vision for how testing of Joule will be done?
Okay,
great question.
Great question. Yeah, I would put it back to the comment about the dentist, right? So look, go away is the objective, right? Now, testing, what does that mean? It means eliminating all the manual work and basically seeing this as something that happens out of the box, right? Now, how do we see that the road to that destination? And this might, not be something that we can fully, reach, but I would say we can approximate. How is the road to that destination? Number one, it goes into really understanding what data, is in the game here. And test generation is one of the use cases that many people speak about. You'll see that there are even new vendors popping up with the, hope that AI will, make testing go away. In the SAP context, we need to think about testing and the need to be specific to the behavior of the system based on several components. Number one, of course, there is a design of the system. So you can say that's the SAP standard. Now, everybody knows SAP standard means we have 25 industries, right, using the system in a gazillion different ways. So you need to understand how that is then mapped to your industry. In your case, that means through your configuration, right? The configuration then multiplied by the extensibility in the system. And this all then multiplied by the way how you have represented your data in your system, right? So making a choice, for instance, how I, define my pricing schema, right? And then how I choose the attributions in my product master to drive that, right? All these are semantically relevant decisions that will have an impact on system behavior, yeah? Which fields are displayed in which sequence, right? So in other words, this is nothing that you can learn, by going out into the internet. You need to be hooked into a combination of reference information from SAP, information in your configuration, information in your data. And this is where the collaboration with SAP is very much alive. Yeah? So my job as head of partnerships is really co-innovating with SAP in bringing together these pieces of data so that the maximum automation can be envisioned. What we see ultimately is that we need to combine ready-to-use content, so think of it as the best practices that we have today, but more granular, more individual, smaller building blocks that actually fit the need of the test cases with data. Yeah? So the flow definition says nothing about who your customers are, how you have coded them, who the most important ones are, because that's what you want to test, right? So that needs to be specific to you, and this is where we see a collaboration with data management providers like Synity, to make that translation job. And then ultimately, of course, and this is where the AI comes in, the assistance, right, of co-pilots, right, to making that whole thing seamless. So it's a kind of guided experience of rapid assembly of test cases based on modular components. That was a mouthful. I hope it answered your question.
I think, overall above all I heard, we're working closely with SAP to figure out what that looks like.
And there's a lot of work. You also heard that, yes. Yes, but we know what this is, and it's not, and if you oversimplify it, you will be disappointed, right? So if you expect that with 30% hits and the rest hallucination, there is much benefit, there isn't.
Another question.
Yeah, so if we're not yet using Linux or Signavio, how do we get our test scripts created and executed in Tricentis?
There are, thank you for the question, there are many sources that you can tap into, right? So for instance, and we do already have AI, for instance, we have a co-pilot that does format conversion of written tests that are basically spelled out as a test instruction into Tosca, right? So you can tap into your Jira or SharePoint or whatever documents and bring those over, for instance, if you have something like that. Or we have the ability to record sessions, and you can generate test scripts from there, right? So that's another source. When I speak about the integrated tool chain, sometimes people walk away with thinking you need to buy the entire thing. That is not the point. The point is that there is a particular benefit of acceleration and a continuous improvement also of that integrated tool chain, because we're all working together, right? We have the intent ultimately of helping SAP's customers to be able to innovate quickly. What I showed there with the business suite and this kind of revolving arrow means the end game is super fast innovation, not year-long, month-long or something like that, but super rapid stuff where you can pop up your AI use cases on top of your data as fast as you want. But the only way to get that to work is to have a lifecycle management process that's highly automated, right? So in order to get there, availability of embedded automated testing is necessary. And again, you want to leverage any type of input that you have or observe, as I say, processes. You could also use mining, to some extent, coming again from the Signavio side. And lastly, when we process further with SAP, we expect to be able to deliver some ready-to-use content for you to directly tap into. Today, there is a portfolio of Tosca test cases that you can buy from SAP, actually. So we are doing that in collaboration. That's not our end game, because that is a little bit like SAP best practices. So it gives you a certain starting point, but you still need to then maintain those things, and it again introduces that burden. But at least there are a number of starters that you can use.
Next question.
Kind of follow up on the previous two questions. So in a world of AI-assisted solutions, we already learned that AI cannot be left to its own vices.
Yes.
AI becomes effective with reinforcement learning of humans and expert being in the middle. And that learning, reinforcement learning, needs to continue. So it's a three-part question. How do you identify humans and experts that needed to be in the middle, where that middle is, and how do you ensure the continuity of the reinforcement learning process, which is not as finite as typical quality assurance or total quality management?
Yeah. Great question. I'll answer the second part first. Yeah, where are those people in the middle? They're not in the middle, they're at the end. Yeah, why? Because testing means knowing what you are about. What is the intent? Yeah, is what we always ask of a test. It is to validate, some state of affairs, right? And that is the end of a process. That is the result of an operation on the database. That is the achieved performance, right? So the insertion points are the beginning and the end. Yeah? Now, how do you identify the right people to do this? Our philosophy is that the business knows what the business wants, or at least it's supposed to. It doesn't always hold true. But the business will give you the people who will say, I need to make sure that, again, my Brazilian customers that are tax exempt and are the ones that had the biggest turnaround in the last quarter are all going fine through the nota fiscal generation. Yeah? Because that saves 80% of my business, right? So the people who know what is meaningful to the business are the individuals who will be able, also in the world of AI, of articulating mission-critical criteria that you need to validate by all the stuff that we're talking about here, right? And the third point, I went to the Gartner conference back in October, I think it was in Barcelona, this XPO. So this is kind of the big event for IT management. And I was very pleased to see a certain degree of realism coming into the AI conversation, where it was quoted that we had, I think, 70% of IT organizations working on fancy AI use cases and only 10% seeing the value, right? What Gartner was proposing is the TRISM, T-R-I-S-M framework, and I cannot, decode the acronym exactly. R was risk, right? And what they were proposing is very similar to what we're saying here. You need to have an operating model supported by a technical platform and the practices, in other words, instructions for how to use this, that are embedded in your change management processes. So in other words, the only way how we can bring this beast under control is by testing left and right and making that part of the continuous operation. There are difficulties with AI, in particular with the type of AI that are statistical in their behavior, right? So this is where you can only indirect assert that something is dangerous or not, right? And we were reminded, and I think it's obvious when you think about it, but sometimes this fades away in the conversation about the magic of artificial intelligence, that you do not want an erratic process to drive something that has a very meaningful impact, unless you have made sure that within that bandwidth of going left and right, it never goes, beyond a certain tolerance level, right? So defining those tolerance levels, something that the people who know what the value that is being generated or should be generated in the business, are capable of articulating and making that something that is not done, by going with a whip after a beast that is, run and has, left the stable, but is achieved by embedding this testing into the process. That's the long answer to your long question. Yeah, but good question.
So just as a side, so that's trust, risk, and security management. And Gartner actually is offering a lot of free webinars that are really quite high quality. So if you sign up for their webinar newsletter, I listened to a great couple ones on enterprise architects. What's the skill enterprise architects need, for example? There was an excellent one available. I have a quick question for you. We got a couple of minutes, just 1 minute left. The knowledge graph, what role, if any, will that have in your solutions in the future?
I think it is ultimately a way of managing the semantic
It should tell you all of the relationships in a particular system and how
it's a way of representing knowledge, right? And so I think it goes a little bit back to this meta model and information flow that I showed before. That, of course, was more the plumbing, right, of what goes from where. The knowledge graph kind of looks, I would say, into it from a three-dimensional perspective and say, okay, what are the individual instances of information and their relationship. So in our world, this could be an interesting means of establishing certain rules, and saying, I want to articulate my test intent, for instance, by making rules, based on certain patterns within the knowledge graph. Yeah? So again, using that as a means to letting the business user think in native terms, and that would be where I'd see it.
Thank you very much, Patrik.
You're welcome.